In a rural town, a man named Daniel owned a large farm with more than 3,000 acres of land. His wife, Margaret, had also inherited 4,000 acres from her family. Together, they had a handsome son named William. Daniel was a traditional man who wanted to pass his land down to his son, believing it was his duty to continue the legacy. However, Margaret had different plans. She was tired of farm life. She wanted to sell the land she inherited and use the money to open a clothing store in the city. This disagreement led to daily arguments between the couple. William, their son, sided with his father and didn't want to leave the farm for the city. Eventually, Margaret, fed up with the fighting, asked Daniel for a divorce. She had already found a buyer for her land and planned to split the money from the sale after the divorce. Daniel was stunned. Losing the land was bad enough, but the thought of losing custody of William was even worse. Margaret insisted that their son should stay with her. Daniel refused to accept that, as he wanted William to inherit the farm. He asked for some time to think things over. One day, as Daniel was at home thinking, a sinister idea crept into his mind. If Margaret were gone, there would be no one to take William away, and the land would remain in their family. Not long after, Daniel noticed that his son William had developed a bond with their neighbor's daughter, Emily. Seeing this, Daniel formed a plan. While working on the farm, Daniel told William that he might not be able to see Emily anymore because Margaret was taking him to the city. William was distraught and asked his father if there was any way to stop it. Daniel didn't explain much but hinted at a solution. If you want to stay with Emily forever, he said, someone has to be out of the way. William understood the dark meaning behind his father's words but remained silent. That evening at dinner, William pleaded with his mother to stay. Instead of comforting him, Margaret slapped him across the face and declared that they were moving to the city. William was furious, and the seeds of resentment took root. The next night, Daniel pretended to agree with Margaret's wishes. He suggested they move to the city together, saying he could work as a repairman. Margaret was overjoyed at his change of heart and let her guard down. That evening, the family had a small party at home. Margaret drank too much and, in her drunken state, started saying crude things about Emily, which enraged William. He stormed out of the house. Later, when Margaret was too drunk to stand, Daniel helped her to bed, watching as she fell asleep. He then found William and convinced him to move forward with their plan. William was reluctant at first, but Daniel manipulated him until he agreed. William grabbed a sack while Daniel took a sharp knife. They crept into Margaret's bedroom. William whispered a goodbye before covering her head with the sack. As she struggled, Daniel swiftly plunged the knife into her neck, silencing her forever. Together, they carried her lifeless body out into the field. The horror of what they had done overwhelmed William, and he fainted. Panicked, Daniel had no choice but to dispose of the body himself. He dragged it to an old well and threw it in. William woke up just as Daniel returned, and they both went back inside to clean up any evidence. The next morning, Daniel took Margaret's suitcase to the well, throwing it in to make it seem as if she had packed her things and run away. When he opened the well's lid, he was horrified to see rats swarming over her body. As he looked closer, he saw something even more disturbing. The corpse's mouth twitched. Daniel froze in fear, thinking he was hallucinating. A rat suddenly crawled out of Margaret's mouth, making him recoil in horror. Furious, he slammed the lid shut and walked away. To further cover his tracks, Daniel began spreading the story that Margaret had abandoned them. When the land buyer arrived, ready to finalize the purchase, Daniel told him Margaret had left unexpectedly. The buyer was skeptical since Margaret had been eager to sell. Sensing trouble, Daniel called William over, and the boy confirmed his father's story. The buyer had no choice but to leave, though Daniel suspected he would alert the police. Realizing he needed a foolproof plan, Daniel devised a cover-up. He and William moved a bowl near the well and placed a thin wooden board over the opening. Then, using a needle, Daniel startled the bull into stepping on the weak spot, causing it to fall into the well. When the police arrived, Daniel acted distraught, explaining that the bull had fallen in. He even invited the officers to search the house, knowing they wouldn't suspect anything. The officers left, seemingly satisfied with the story. As the days passed, William grew restless. Emily noticed his change in behavior and confided in Daniel, worried about William's mood swings. Daniel brushed it off, but deep down he knew William was struggling with guilt. One night, strange things began happening on the farm. The cows became restless, their loud cries echoing through the fields. Daniel went to investigate and found a rat gnawing at one of the animals. Disgusted, he killed the rat, but something about the scene unsettled him. Later, as winter approached, Daniel's troubles escalated. His house began leaking, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't keep up with repairs. To make matters worse, he was running out of money. Emily's father, Henry, came by one day and demanded Daniel pay $300 for Emily's nursing care, offering to cover most of the cost if Daniel contributed $75. Daniel refused, saying his wife had taken all the money. Furious, Henry insisted Daniel take out a loan. He warned that if Daniel didn't pay within a week, he would take Emily away. William overheard the conversation and panicked. He didn't want to be separated from Emily. Later, he told his father that they should elope. Daniel dismissed the idea, knowing they had no money and Emily was too young. This led to a heated argument, and William stormed off, heading for town alone. Left alone, Daniel searched Margaret's belongings, hoping she had hidden some money. He found a small amount but nowhere near enough to cover the debt. Desperate, he went to the bank, but they refused to give him a loan. As he was leaving, Daniel found a letter in his car. It was from William. He had run away with Emily. He warned Daniel not to look for them, threatening to expose Margaret's murder if he did. Daniel was left staring at the letter, realizing that everything he had done had led to this moment. His family was gone, his farm was falling apart, and he was drowning in guilt. That night, as he sat in his home, contemplating his mistakes, something unexpected happened. A drop of blood suddenly fell on a book. This scared Daniel so much that he looked up, and in that moment he thought he saw the sky's ceiling. The next day, the police chief came to Daniel's house and told him that a grocery store in the town had been robbed. According to the report, the police chief suspected a person named Margaret might be involved. When Daniel heard this, he immediately denied it. He was sure that Margaret was not the thief. He had always seen her as a good person, and he believed the police chief must have made a mistake. He was about to put the money away when a mouse suddenly appeared and bit his hand. In pain, Daniel threw the mouse on the ground and stepped on it. He then quickly disinfected his hand, but the injury meant he couldn't repair the roof, which had been leaking for a while. Over time, the hole in the roof grew bigger, and winter came. By then, Daniel's hand still wasn't fully healed. He wanted to go to the hospital, but his car wouldn't start. So, he went back inside to warm up. Suddenly, the wind blew the door open, and Daniel saw his wife's body lying in the living room. This terrified him, and he thought he was seeing things. He turned to look again, and to his shock, his wife really was there. She started chasing him, and in his panic, Daniel accidentally fell down the stairs. Before he could calm down, his dead wife slowly walked down the stairs toward him. Surprisingly, she didn't harm him but instead told him a strange story. She said that the two of them had been eating one day when a boss from a nearby store found them in the newspaper. Just as they were about to leave, the boss took out a needle and injected the girl with something. The thief, who had been with the girl, rushed her to the hospital, but while driving he lost control of the car and ended up in a ditch. Since it was too cold to stay outside, the thief took the girl to an old, broken house. He went out to find some firewood, and when he returned, he discovered that the girl had already passed away. Unable to handle the loss, the thief chose to end his own life. After hearing this story, Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. Everything seemed so unreal. Time passed, and eventually, the police found Daniel and took him to the hospital because his injury was worsening. The doctor immediately started treating him, and while they were examining him, the police chief told Daniel that they had found a woman's body. The physical description was very similar to Daniel's wife, and the police chief believed that she had been murdered during the road incident. Daniel didn't say anything in response. He knew the police had made a mistake, and he was only trying to clear his name. The police chief also mentioned that they had found out about Margaret's suicide. Daniel was shocked to see Margaret's body, which had been badly disfigured by rats. As Daniel turned away from the scene, he saw his wife standing there, walking back toward him. He quickly left to find Dashan, hoping to sell his land. But when he found Dashan, he learned that Dashan had lost his daughter and was already deep in debt. Despite this, Daniel decided to sell his land to a real estate agent. He sold the land, moved to the city, and started working hard at a job. Even though he had left the farm, the rats still seemed to follow him. To avoid thinking about it, Daniel started drinking every day after work. For 2 years, he kept drinking, spending all the money he had earned from selling the land. Every time he went to a small town or place, he regretted his decision. He wished he had listened to his wife, because if he had, he might have had his family with him now. The story ends with Daniel having gray hair. One day, a little boy called out to him, and Daniel stood up to find his wife and daughter looking at him.